Hello, I'm Jay Taylor with Warren Berkeley, and we welcome you to another episode of All About Books. Warren and I have a new book that we want to talk with you about, and we have a special guest who will help us talk about this book. Warren, what is the book that we're going to talk about, and who is with us today?
So I have two introductions as we begin this episode. One, I'm going to introduce the book, and then two, I'm going to introduce one of the writers. The book is God's Creatures in God's Word. You know, the Bible is loaded with animal imagery. And if you understand something about the animal, and then you look into the context where that animal is referred to, that can be very helpful. And so this book is about the animal imagery in the Bible. And I think one unique thing about this book is the writers are men who are experts in regard to the animals they were assigned. So we have veterinarians, we have marine biologists, all of them considered to be good Bible students with backgrounds that qualify them, all of them Christians, many of them elders. And one of the writers is with us for this episode, Rob Perkins, who wrote the chapter about sheep. Rob, we welcome you here, and we'd like for you to start by telling us a little bit about your background professionally and spiritually.
Well, I'm a 1981 graduate of the Texas A&M University School of Veterinary Medicine. And I was up at A&M from, 1973 to 1981. My first year of practice was in Mahia, Texas, and I was in a beef cattle practice, primarily beef cattle, and worked there for a year before I moved to Corpus Christi, and I've been here ever since. And so that's it professionally. Spiritually, well, I'm an elder at Parkway Church of Christ in Corpus Christi. I had the great benefit of having two very godly parents. And mother and dad, we lived all over the country. And when I was in about the 8th grade, we moved to Houston, Texas, and attended the Spring Branch congregation. And so when anybody asks me where home is, I always say Houston. And Dad was a deacon at Spring Branch and went on to become an elder. And so I've got, as far as family background, I've got a rich, what I consider a spiritual heritage from the physical standpoint. My parents, what a great blessing. And so Julie and I moved down here and been at Parkway ever since. They made me a deacon, and then I don't know why, but they chose me to be an elder. And they may have had a few regrets for all I know, but nobody said anything yet. So that's, in a nutshell, that's it.
Jay?
Well, Rob, how did you become part of this work, of this book?
Well, funny that you should ask that. It was actually Warren Berkeley that asked me. I don't know if he called me or emailed me or texted me. I don't know which. But anyway, he asked me if I'd like to be a part of it. And I never had really done anything like this before. I have written a chapter in a genealogy book, but I thought I always sort of like to challenge myself. And so I thought, I told him pretty quickly that, yeah, I would do it. And he asked me what animal I wanted to choose. So I chose sheep for several reasons. One is in a mixed animal practice, we see a fair amount of sheep. And of course, being a shepherd in a congregation, and then the scripture is just so rich in talking about sheep and flocks of sheep. And I think the imagery is just great.
Well, being a veterinarian and then also an elder in the Lord's church, you have, of course, knowledge of sheep in the scripture and then knowledge of sheep in your practice. But in your research about sheep and shepherds for this book, what helps us understand ourselves as sheep, and then maybe address the shepherd aspect of that? So the sheep aspect and then the shepherd aspect.
Well, you know, raising sheep is a lot different now than it was in biblical times. And maybe in some parts of the area it's pretty similar, but at least in South Texas, it's, you know, all the countryside is fenced off. You're not migrating with a flock of sheep over hundreds of miles. And so that's an aspect of sheep that I think that a lot of people don't understand, even people that raise sheep today. Used to be predation would be a really bad problem. Lions and bears and wolves and coyotes and birds of prey. But nowadays, the best guard against predators is a good strong fence. Maybe a sheepdog or a donkey even that stays with those sheep all day long. So that's an important part of it. And what I've learned from this and in the research is that, of course, that in a flock of sheep, you have old sheep and young sheep, and may have some sheep that are handicapped, with a lameness. And I think that that's really important when a shepherd in a congregation looks at his flock of sheep and understands that each and every one of them are really, really important. Am I still answering your question, or am I going the direction you want me to go?
Yeah, you're right on target.
All right, good deal. Well, I get distracted sometimes. Carry on a little bit. But so, and a lot of things that I think that people may not understand, a sheep, they're not like a lion, got sharp teeth or claws or really any defense mechanisms. And in nature, the way a sheep protects himself is within the flock. And so if it's a predator coming, they'll circle up, and the stronger animals will be on the periphery, and the weaker ones will be on the inside. And just that united front is enough to intimidate a predator, so to speak. And so then when you transcribe that information onto a flock of Christians, certainly we have the promise, 1 Corinthians 10:13, about temptations, and individually we don't have to go after that. But the collective nature of a congregation and that defense mechanism, I think is just huge that a lot of people don't think about or realize.
Rob, you started out with some knowledge and some experience. Give us some examples. Maybe you already have started down this road. Give us some examples of something you discovered in the research for writing this chapter that really impressed you and struck your mind.
Well, one of the models, and I mentioned this in this chapter, for shepherding sheep is the sheep industry in South Texas. It used to be huge, and it's not now for some pretty valid reasons, but it used to be huge. And so when and I'm big on reading historical sorts of things. So those shepherds, they might be out with the flock for 2 or 3 years, and just with that flock of sheep for that length of time. And some of the quotations are that a shepherd of a flock of sheep hadn't slept in a bed or inside a house for like 2 years. I mean, and so that's sort of a lonely life, but your only friends are all those sheep. So you get to know them pretty well, right? And one thing about that is, when Jesus talks about, I think it's in John, when he talks about the sheep know the sound of his voice. So when you think about a walled city and all the different flocks would come in, they put them in a communal area, but then that shepherd knows those sheep so well that they hear his voice, and his individual sheep, Jesus Christ sheep, will come to him because they know him and they know his voice. And so that's really important. When a lot of elders in congregations, a lot of shepherds sit up at the front of the building. I don't. I sit on the back row because I want to be able to see my flock and see everything's going on. A lot of times visitors and weak people come in late, leave early. Well, I need to know that as a shepherd. And as much as I can know my flock, I need to do that. The other thing that really struck me was considering the young shepherd David and thinking about the time that he spent with a flock of sheep. And you think about those skills that David had developed, and he was really good at playing musical instruments, right? Well, you can imagine the life of a shepherd's got to be pretty boring, and so you could learn to play a harp or whatever the musical instrument is. You think about his skills with a sling and a stone. So if a predator is coming up and you sling that thing and you put a rock right between the eyes of that coyote or that wolf, then those are some skills where you can, where you don't have to get up. You can keep playing your harp and scare those predators away. So just thinking about David and the many hours and days and weeks and months of solitude where he's just with those sheep tells me a lot about the skills that he developed there so that he could become the shepherd of Israel.
So you're telling us that shepherd work is dirty to some extent. They're not in an office making decisions about the flock. They are out there observing, feeding, and caring for the flock. Do I understand that correctly?
Well, Warren, I mean, I think those are, baby steps. You're coming along pretty good. But I think that's absolutely right. And so when you think about what a shepherd does for sheep, and when those ewes are lambing and having those babies, they're helping deliver those babies. They might tie off the umbilical cord. They might deliver the placenta. They might clean all the mucus out of the mouth and the nostrils of that lamb. Might even have to blow into it to get it to take those first breaths. And then all the illnesses that sheep get. And one of the big things as we're treating sheep was they get bit, lacerated, oftentimes right before the stock show. And usually it's those sheep dogs that do it. They get a little bit too aggressive. And so a shepherd might have to suture up some of those sorts of lacerations. And parasitism is not a huge deal when you're moving sheep from pasture to pasture to pasture. Because if they're having a bowel movement, they're excreting those worm eggs, they saturate the soil with those parasites. And especially if they're eating that grass close to that ground, they're going to pick up dirt and pick up parasites too. And that's in pasture-raised sheep, that's a huge problem. In areas of high humidity like South Texas, that's a huge problem. That's a big reason why I think that there's not a big shepherd industry in hot, humid areas like South Texas. And so a shepherd, I think, David didn't know about the life cycle of a parasite, but he would know that if you move from pasture to pasture, don't let those sheep graze that grass down all the way to the roots, just the top of it and move somewhere else, that those sheep are going to be healthier. So to your point, Warren, that elders need to be involved, not like just sort of reigning and delegating all this sort of work. It's pretty hands-on, I think, as a shepherd. And so I think that's an important thing to understand.
I think you probably already started to answer this. How do you believe this book can help people in Bible study and in spiritual discipline?
Well, I just think it's huge. The Bible was written to really a primitive type of people compared to us. They didn't know anything about physiology. They didn't know anything about red blood cells and what they did and all that stuff. And so I think you've got to look at the people to who the Bible was written to. And a great many of them were agrarian in nature, crops, fields, and husbandry, like with sheep. And so when the scriptures would be read to them, immediately they'd know what was talked about. And it would click. They'd catch it. But that doesn't happen with us. My wife, the only thing she knows about lambs are lamb chops that she buys at H-E-B. And really sanitized, nothing about the processing and, to be a Jew and all the sacrifices they would do. Those high priests and all the priests, this was really a pretty bloody job. There's no way to sanitize that and make it something that is not. And so I think there's so many aspects. If we really want to understand the Bible, it would do us well to do some research. And I think that's exactly what a book like this does. And I commend you for the endeavor. How'd you come up with that idea?
Paul and I, when we're out driving, then we have to talk when we're traveling. And some of the books that we have edited, we do mostly editing. Some of the books, ideas we've had come up when we're out on the road. And we were out on the road one time and something came up in a Bible reading. and we started listing animals. And then I thought, well, who are we going to get to write this? And we need people who know about those animals. And so then we started. And it's been about a 3-year project. You know, we had some stalls along the way. Some of the writers, I've learned a lot about veterinarians. You guys are busy.
Oh, we're busy. Yes, we are.
And all kinds of things come up. And so we had a couple of writers who had something come up, and that postponed the deadline. And then, of course, the whole COVID thing has stalled everything. But we came up with the idea just driving it to a meeting somewhere and talking about it.
Well, and there's not much that bothers a veterinarian. When I go out to eat with my friends and I talk about what I do, a lot of them get sick to their stomachs. But
yeah,
I tell people I could sit on a dead cow and eat a hamburger. And
so. Thank you for that, doctor.
You might want to edit that out. I'm not sure.
Let me tell you while we're here, and then I'll go to Jay, and then back to me. We've got the eagle, pigs, lions, dogs, deer, sheep, serpents and snakes, cattle and goats in this book. And, you know, I just thought of something. This would probably be a good book. What do you say, Rob, for junior high and high school classes?
Oh, absolutely. When I'm teaching a Bible class, for many years, all I did was teach adult classes. But I decided that as an elder, that I needed to get involved in those high school and junior high classes and get to know those kids and expose them to me. And some mothers who would probably not like that would want to shelter their kids from me. But I will enrich those classes with my experiences with animals, and they tend to find that fascinating. They don't really know a lot about historical things, even in fairly recent history. And education is fairly sanitized nowadays, but I think it's really rich when you can include things like that into a Bible class.
I'll tell you, I thought about, you've got a kid who may be involved in 4-H. Is there still 4-H?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Got a kid who's involved in that, getting an animal ready, but may not be that interested in intense Bible study. Get them this book, and whatever they're working on, they'll read that chapter, and maybe that will spark their interest in other areas. You think?
More.
Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that Warren and I want to do with this program, of course, we enjoy reading. We're good reading partners, but we want people reading the Bible. And so we always try to end our program by talking to our guests about daily Bible reading, not only your own daily Bible reading, but maybe what you're doing at the congregation you're a part of. So talk to us about a daily Bible reading.
Well, I read, first thing I do every morning, of course, I make some coffee, and but I sit down with my Bible and I read it. And I read out of the last 2-3 years, I've been reading out of the narrated Bible. Really like it. And so I'll read as much as I want to. And I don't really necessarily have a deadline for how much I'm going to read, but I'll read. And I think that there's something called purpose-driven reading. And you may not know this, Jay, I think Warren does, but I write a blog and on Bible-based topics. And I did that a long time ago. My daughter actually recommended it to me. And so I started doing it. And that has really has really affected me. It really changed a lot of things about me. That blog, for some reason, goes all over the world. And it's had like 70,000 views on it. And so I try to write a Bible-based article once a week. And so ideas for that would come from sitting in Bible class or listening to a sermon, but usually it comes from reading out of that narrated Bible. I use a different colored pen. Every time I go through there, I use a different colored pen. Right now I use a purple pen. And I write things, and I underline things, and I put stars on things. And in the back, because in a narrated Bible, you can't write book, chapter, and verse because it's all mixed up. But I'll write the page number on the back. And then when it's come times for me to write an article, I'll go back there and look at those notations and then try to do something that I think is worthwhile. So that's one of my purposes. The other purpose is that I think if I don't know my Bible really, really well, that I'm bankrupting the congregation. Their expectation of me should be that I know the Bible almost better than anybody. And I'll tell you, they picked me to be an elder when I was just 44 years old, which is pretty young. And back then, I thought I knew the Bible pretty well, and I think I did know it pretty well. But I don't know it near as well as I know it now. And I anticipate that in future years that I'll know it even better and better and better. So I think especially a shepherd in the Lord's congregation really be on top of his game. And I think you've got to think outside the box also. When I look at my responsibilities as an elder, I think about Ephesians chapter 4, when God gave gifts to the church, one of those is elders, for the maturation process of building people to grow to the fullness of the stature of Jesus Christ. I need to know about that. I need to know about the process, how it's accomplished, and is there anybody limiting me or any notions, traditional notions, that are holding me back from doing that? And so I don't want to just read everything that the brethren have written, although I do think that's important, but I want to do some independent study and independent thinking so that I can fulfill the charge that the Lord God Almighty has given me to raise my charge, all those little sheep, old and young, and crippled, and every one of them to be where they need to be. And my goal, of course, is that on the day of judgment, that our congregation, symbolically, will march into through the pearly gates, and the Lord will say, "Well done, faithful servant." And I think that starts with Bible study.
Well, Brother
daily
Perkins,
Bible reading is certainly important. You've mentioned your blog. Where can we find that blog?
I don't know. It's called something like Parkway Church News.
I think there's a link to it at the Parkway website, and we'll put a link to that as we post this video.
Yeah. And in fact, when I was writing this chapter, I tend to put things off to the last minute. I'm real busy, got a lot of things I got to do. And so I thought, well, I'll just start writing articles about it at first. And so that's what I did. And in fact, some of those articles are in that chapter.
well, Brother Perkins, Dr. Perkins, we sure appreciate it. This has been so enlightening, and I think it's going to help people.
I'm not really done yet, Warren.
Okay.
One of those talking points was about how you got started reading, right? And I remember this, that my dad used to read these little Western paperback books, you know, Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey, Max Brown. I started reading all those things. And I read so much that I get in trouble from my mother. She sent me upstairs one time to vacuum my room. I laid on that bed with a book in my hand, turned the vacuum cleaner on with one hand, just sort of made motions with that vacuum cleaner. And then she came up and I got in a little bit of trouble. But I do think it's so important to read and read everything. Have a broad thing if you're reading. I like Western historical things. Right now I'm reading about Cabeza de Vaca. I think it does a lot of things for you. It makes you a better speller. It enriches your vocabulary and makes you a more well-rounded individual for when you're teaching Bible classes.
Good. Thank you a lot. We're going to put ordering information under the video in the comments. And I want to explain that this book is a benefit book for sacred selections. I need for us to keep that in mind. That's where the proceeds go. And so I'm going to put a link under there to Rob's blog, Sacred Selections. We're going to put One Stone. They're the publishers. We're going to put Amazon. And today, Barnes & Noble picked it up for ordering. You can't go into a store and get it in Barnes & Noble, but you can order it from the Barnes & Noble website. Now, the only reason I mention that is if you've got an old Barnes & Noble gift card way back up under a drawer somewhere, this is the time to take it out and go to Barnes and Noble and tell them you want to order this book, or go to the website and order it. The royalties from Barnes and Noble are very small. The best way to benefit Sacred Selections is to go to One Stone and get it from One Stone. Then Amazon, Barnes and Noble. We're going to put all those links under the video. Okay, Jay.
Well, Warren, Brother Perkins, we want to thank y'all for being part of this program. We see some practical value to this book, not only for, as we've talked about, our Bible classes, but especially this chapter on sheep for those who are serving as elders in the Lord's church. Just a lot of good information, lessons for shepherds, and so we want to commend that book to you. And so until next time, we thank you for watching this broadcast of All About Books.